Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. On September the 17th, 2009, my guest today was arrested at Bhikaji Kama place at a bus stop. It wasn't so much an arrest as an abduction, and it made front page newspaper headlines. It was the subject of television news all over the country that night. The police accused him of being a politburo member of the Naxalites, something that he vehemently rejects. But he was held for 10 years in 6 different jails, stretching from Visakhapatnam to Delhi, from Jharkhand to Surat. And during that period, he was only convicted on one issue: impersonation. 10 years later, in October 2019, he got bail, and since then, he's written a book. Here it is. It's called Fractured Freedom, a Prison Memoir. It's a revealing account of the decade he spent in jail, but it's also a thoughtful reflection on an ideology he's espoused since he was a teenager: communism. Joining me now to talk about his book and his experiences is Kobad Ghandy. Mr. Gandhi, the preface of your book has a dramatic account of your arrest in September 2009. And as I said, it wasn't so much an arrest as an abduction. Why don't you start by describing what happened on that day?
Yes, it was a normal September afternoon, and actually, the background is that I'd never been arrested in the earlier 40 years, and I had gone to purchase computer material at the Bhikaji Kama complex. And when I came down and was waiting at the bus stop to meet a friend, hardly had I stopped there for 2 minutes when an SUV drove up. Some 6 toughs jumped out, pushed me to the ground, snatched all my papers and everything that I had, dragged me to the car and sped off at breakneck speed. And then they went driving around and around the city. I couldn't see where because it had dark glasses, so I couldn't see out. And what happened was that they were talking in Telugu to their bosses continuously, non-stop. The only word I could understand in all that was airport. They kept saying airport. And when I heard airport, I said, oh, this is the end. And because the Andhra IB are known to go to take up people in helicopters to the forest and bump them off and say killed in encounter. So I said that probably this is the end anyway. And I was expecting that, but somehow they drove around. I was picked up or abducted at 4 in the afternoon. It was the Andhra IB. They introduced themselves later. And then they drove around the city talking. I couldn't understand their language. Telugu, I don't understand. They spoke for nearly till 3 in the morning. Somewhere around the line, they probably decided against the encounter, and they drove up to a secluded house with huge high walls, one of those Wada type of places. It looked like the outskirts of Delhi. And it was 3 in the morning by then. And it was quite a harrowing experience. And there I was, they said, go to sleep. And in the early morning, they came for questioning. There were a whole lot of people from various states, mostly but Andhra people. And they began their questioning, and it went on. They did threaten, but no beating was there. But they tried to get hold of the computers and laptops that I had, but they were not able to because it's all unofficial. The IB is not allowed to arrest, apparently. That I found out afterwards. I knew nothing about the law. And then on the 20th, this was 17th, on the 20th, it seems the news had leaked out. How, I don't know, but the news had leaked out that I had disappeared. And so there was a flutter in the morning. And they said, no, the news is out and we have to immediately produce you in the special cell. Tell the special cell people that you were just arrested today. Don't tell them it was 3 days back. So then they deposited me at the special cell office, Delhi Police Special Cell. And there I was then arrested officially.
Let me put this to you. You're saying for 3 days, you were driven around and held in captivity after first being abducted on the streets of the capital by the Andhra police. For 3 days, you were held in captivity without recourse to a lawyer, without being brought before a magistrate.
Yes.
That is, in a nutshell, what happened to you, isn't it?
Really? Yeah. That is what happened. I believe that's the norm
Were
in
you
Andhra, the
nervous? Were
earlier
you
times.
scared?
Well, yes and no, I was, but the thing is that they, the Andhra police can easily, even after 3 days, if it doesn't come out in the media, they can finish you off after getting the information.
So you were
And they're
really
known to do that.
scared. So you were
Yeah,
really
of course.
scared that you could be killed. In
Yes,
an
yes, of course.
unaccountable
Yes.
way, you could be killed.
Yeah. A fake encounter, as they call it. Yes, that's what's the norm. It was the norm in Andhra.
During this 3 days when you were held in captivity, did you
Yeah.
ask for a lawyer?
Well, there was no question. I was illegally kept, so I didn't even think about it. When I was in the special cell, there I did. And when I was produced in court, Rebecca, John Advocate, and all the lawyers were there present at the court. So once I was produced, then things began officially. But
So,
there
so
also
this
uh,
arrest on the 17th of September 2009
yeah,
led to 10 years in jail. Given
yeah.
that the authorities claim you are a member of the Naxalite politburo, something which you deny to me and which you don't confirm in your book, were
Yeah.
you at any point physically roughed up? Were you tortured? Because the Naxalites are a banned organization, and by reputation, it's believed that when they are arrested, they are usually tortured or roughed up. So, were you physically mistreated? Were you tortured?
Well, it was mostly the entire thing, this Politburo business and the whole question of media being a leader of the Maoists was throughout the entire period, it was basically a media trial. There was no evidence. They produced nothing. They had nothing on. It was a media trial.
But were you
And
tortured? Were you
no,
tortured?
frankly, I must say that I was not tortured. I maybe threatened. I was threatened, but never tortured. And probably after some time, they realized that I didn't have that much information that they were seeking, and they didn't pursue that much. But the torture, the torture, where 10 years in a jail, that too Tihar type of jail, is worse than any torture. It breaks the
Absolutely.
person, it breaks the
Let's
person morally, structurally, everywhere.
let's come to those 10 years in jail.
Yeah.
Most people hearing you will want to hear you answer one question. What was
Yes.
jail like?
Well, out of the 10 years, I spent 7 years in Tihar, the Delhi fast track court, mind you, the Delhi fast track court with excellent judges took 7 years to decide one case. And the Delhi government then in 2010 passed this 268 resolution saying that I was not to be produced anywhere outside Delhi. I had 18 cases on me until this case got over. So I was just stuck there. And it was horrifying, the Tihar jail. I mean, firstly, in jail, one is denied all rights, even if you are in under trial. In most other countries, you only go to jail after conviction. But in India, you are in jail as an under trial for years and years. In jail, under trials have far less rights than the convicts, surprisingly, though we have never been proven guilty. We can't lift a finger or even breathe without someone breathing down your neck. It is, you have to just crawl before you can find out anything. And we in the high risk ward, Naxalite, top Naxalite, all that stuff, we were put in the high risk ward. It's virtually a jail within a jail. It becomes impossible to, psychologically, they break you. And if you in any way, like on 2 occasions in jail, when once I didn't do anything, apparently I went late for this thing, but for the going to the court, they threatened, they beat me up, they roughed me, the jail authorities. The superintendent then backed the jail authorities and he punished me for going late. Well, all the other dons out there went much later after me. And on another occasion, when I campaigned against two notorious authorities, campaign means what? I just wrote a letter, signed a letter with everyone to the DG. That's all, petitioning. That was just not done. I was threatened. This thing, they immediately took my luggage and threw it out and made me stand in the sun for 5 hours transferring me to another jail, and then started the procedure of regular jail transfer. It was horrific every 3 months.
So there
So,
were occasions in
yeah,
Tihar when you were beaten up. There were occasions when you were made to stand in the hot sun as punishment.
yeah, roughed up, I would say. They pushed me around and stand in the hot sun. And then with the transfers also, I had to go on a hunger strike before the then DG, a very nice person, the Director General of Alok Verma, incidentally, who then became CBI chief. He intervened and said he is not to be shifted again and kept in one place. But
Now,
it was horrifying.
in your book, this is what you write about Tihar. Throughout my time in Tihar, I was in a cell with a CCTV camera being watched day and night. It is perched just above the toilet so that, except in the bath and toilet, you are under 24-hour surveillance. All the time, Big Brother is watching you. Was that easy to get used to?
Well, it wasn't at all. I mean, imagine you are being watched every second of the day. You're even scratching, or this thing is being observed. And not only was I observed by the camera, then also the guards would keep coming up at night and looking through the cell and things like that. So it was quite horrifying. That's all psychologically pressurizing. Basically, this jail is so constructed that it's psychologically they seek to destroy you. And even I was taken to courts in the hospital in a van, put in a cage with 24 armed guards with what's it called, bulletproof jackets, and put in a cage within a cage within a cage, 3 levels of cages.
And the
Can you
important thing,
imagine?
this was happening to you not when you were a convict who had been found guilty of anything
That's
by the court. You were under trial and still presumed to be innocent. And yet,
absolutely.
the treatment.
Absolutely. And that's how the Indian jails function. And of course, some are worse than others, but that's how it is.
Now, there's a
And not only
sentence in your book that caught my attention when I was reading it. You write about the need for a Western toilet in jail. And you say, without it, life can become intolerable. Did they give you one?
well, intolerable if you have arthritis and sciatica, which I acquired. At the beginning, there was no problem. I didn't have these problems. I used an Indian toilet. But after, when you get severe arthritic pains and sciatica, you just cannot squat in that way. And I asked, I lobbied, I went to the judge, I went to this. Still, it took 3 years for them to give a Western toilet. They made it finally. While more sensitive places like Jharkhand and even Surat, for that matter, they made a Western toilet in 3 days. Here it took 3 years.
So Tihar, in
And it
some
was,
senses, was a much worse experience than the other jails you spent time in. Tihar was the worst of them all.
and I spent 7 years there out of the 10, virtually, nearly 7 years.
Now,
It was like, wow.
the other striking thing that jumps at you when you read your book is the fact that prisoners can be very helpful, considerate, and kind to each other. For a while, you shared a ward with the Don at Sunil Rathi. I believe he was accused of murder. And when your slippers and shoes wore out, it was Sunil Rathi who came to your help and assistance.
Well, many have come like that to one's assistance, but Sunil Rathi is a top don of UP and from the Meerut area. And his father was actually killed by the zamindars out there. His father was close to Charan Singh, a Kisan leader. He comes from that Tikait belt. And he had a certain amount of sensitivity, and he did respond in that way and help. Why, in Jharkhand jail, the top don that was there, Titu Sharma, if it hadn't been for him, I would have been helpless in the entire jail. He helped me so much.
But Sunil Rathi, I believe, gave you his new pair of Adidas shoes.
Yes, he gave shoes and slippers, Puma slippers. He must have got some after that. Yes, he did.
So if he hadn't stepped in to give you his shoes and slippers, you'd have had to go barefoot.
Well, not barefoot. I would have broken slippers and sandals.
Now, in one of your letters to your friend Gautam Vora, which is part of the appendix of the book, you make a very interesting observation about prisoners in general. You write, most have one aim, to commit a bigger crime on their release and make lots of money. In other words, jail may be intended to reform, but it doesn't succeed in doing so.
It is called the Tihar Ashram, where reform is supposed to be the main agenda. They have certain de-addiction centers and things like that, but it is basically a home for, it's a school for criminalization of people. Why? I'll tell you. One is that all the smaller criminals seek to become bigger criminals. They meet their contemporaries, they draw links, the nexus develops, and they say, "Bahar jaake bada ban jayega." That is one. Second point is that in Tihar, Tihar and in the court system, people are so tense that they have to smoke tobacco and charas or charas, whatever. Tobacco is banned. A small 10 rupee pouch of tobacco costs about 1,000 to 1,500 rupees. To buy that, they have to resort to criminal activities. So they are pushed to criminal activities within jail to merely sustain themselves mentally.
Tell me something. Are drugs rife in jail?
Sorry, are drugs
Rife in jail? Are they commonplace? Is everyone or a lot of
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because the tensions are so high. Without it, I think, and also the earning, the staff who earns from it, the other bigger dons who earn from it, some others, there's a huge earning from drugs.
And the police, and you're saying the police and the jail staff are involved in the peddling of drugs?
Yeah, as everywhere. I think that's the norm. Yes.
Now, one of the most striking things in your book is your account of the people you got to know. In many instances, they were people you shared a cell with. Some of them are very interesting, others are very notorious. For instance, one of them is the Nirbhaya Rapist Vinay Sharma. What was he like?
Horrible, terrible. I've never met such a person in the entire jail journey as him. Actually, what happened was after this transfers were stopped by the DG, the superintendent of the jail started breaking up my cell because he said repairs had to be done. Whether it was real or contrived, I don't know. But I was put in a cell with Vinay Sharma for nearly a month and a half. And he was a liar, he was a cheat, he was just in every way bad. And being a Sharma, he acted as though he was very pure, a pujari. He would recite, he was just terrible. And to the extent that, of course, that's the patriarchal atmosphere also helped that. When December 16 came and his mother would be in the news, the Nirbhaya's mother would be in the news, he would openly say everywhere, she should be raped now. Can you imagine? It was really disgusting.
Of Nirbhaya's mother when she was on the news on the anniversary, December the 16th.
Yeah, anniversary, yeah.
That she should be raped.
Yeah, look at it, because she was making a big noise, that's why. It was really disgusting. But, you know, the patriarchal atmosphere out there, people, you'd make a joke of the rape. In the jail, the staff, a lot of the people. No one felt it. It was really gruesome as it was. No one took it serious, especially after a few years. And that's why he could get the confidence to talk like that.
So in other words, he wasn't ostracized by other prisoners for the rape. He, in a sense, was treated as normal, perhaps even valorized.
Yes, absolutely. I believe in the beginning stages, I heard that one or two of them were a bit ostracized right at the beginning. But by the time he came to our ward and things like that had died down, things were just normal. One person
someone you got to know very well is Afzal Guru. We know him as a conspirator who was sentenced to death for his role in the 2001 attack on Parliament. However, this is what you write of Afzal Guru when you first met him. You say he had a knack of converting basically hot water into an excellent cup of tea. I'm intrigued. Tell me more about that.
No, the thing is that I was really fortunate. I was brought to a high-risk ward. The high-risk ward has 2 blocks. And fortunately, I came to that block where as soon as I entered the block, he was in the first cell and he was waving to me frantically, smiling. They had been locked up by then. He said, I thought you'd be here, he said, first thing, thinking after seeing the news in the papers, I thought you'd be coming here. We'll meet in the morning. So I was taken to another cell and locked up. Next morning, he was there early, as soon as the gates opened at 5:30 and said, come on out, come on for tea. And every day after that, every morning, till he was hanged, we would be having tea together. You know, in Tihar, all the food is watery, the tea is watery, it has no taste. So what he had a white thermos flask, which I asked as a souvenir when he was hanged, but they didn't give it. In that flask, he would take the hot water, tea, and add 1 or 2 tea bags bought from the canteen and milk powder, also bought from a canteen, and make an excellent cup of tea. So we would be given that hot water and 2 pieces of bread. So we would have that with the bread. So he made excellent, and it's over these rounds of tea that he introduced me to people like Rumi, Iqbal, Islam even, Islam, which he was opposed to the fundamentalist approach, and true tenets of Islam. All that he introduced me, which I knew nothing about earlier.
So in addition to being a great maker of tea, and as you say, your day began every morning with a cup of tea made by Afzal Guru. In addition to that, it transpires he was a very well-informed, learned, perhaps even scholarly person. You say he introduced me to the Kashmir situation, Islam and its progressive aspects, and most importantly, he introduced you to Sufi thinking.
Absolutely. But the thing is that he knew English and Urdu very well. He didn't know Hindi, the script. He would speak Hindi, but he was a great Sufi fanatic. I mean, he had all the 6 volumes of Rumi in Urdu, and he would regularly study it. And I would make notes, copious notes from his morning. And I, in fact, wrote a poem taking from Rumi also once on Anuradha. And Iqbal also. I mean, these I didn't know any. And also the question that I just realized from him also, that Islam was one of the latest religions. So it had many progressive aspects to it.
Also. Did I hear you say, Mr. Gandhi, that Afzal Guru wrote a poem on your late wife Anuradha while he was...
No, I wrote it. I wrote it after hearing it. Yes, I wrote it after... from one of the things he would talk about Rumi and dictate, and I would write it down in English. And from that, I wrote it.
He inspired this poem in you.
Absolutely. And he had read people like Noam Chomsky and other left intellectuals and things like that. He was well read. He was certainly well read. He was no terrorist, and he was opposed to killing people and throwing bombs in public. And he just couldn't get on with the fundamentalists in our ward. I'm
intrigued, as I'm sure the audience will be, by your description and account of Afzal Guru. Tell me, you got to know him as a human being. The rest of us only know of him from newspaper accounts of someone who was accused of conspiracy to overthrow or to attack parliament and then sentenced to death. What was he like? What sort of person was he? How would you describe him?
He was very humanistic. Actually, I didn't go into the whole parliamentary attack case. He had a strong feeling for the oppression that is going on in Kashmir. And he was also religious. But he was not fundamentalist or a fanatic. He was very humanistic. For example, I'll give you an example. One day I caught him, illegal mobiles are there, people use. He was talking to his wife and singing ghazals to her for hours on end on the mobile. And I was so shocked. I couldn't see. And of course, I saw that the wife, child, and mother would come regularly, and he was very close. In fact, his main demand was, he tried to put a main demand with the Supreme Court, which was his right, that he be transferred to Srinagar jail so that he could be close to his family. But that didn't happen.
It's amazing. You say you once found him on a mobile that he'd been able to get hold of whilst he was in Tihar, singing ghazals to his wife in Srinagar. It seems Afzal Guru was a bit of a romantic.
Yes, he was like that. He was a very humane person. And he was very, like the other Islamists, and I couldn't care about the Indian conditions, Indian people, but he had showed a lot of concern about the poverty in India and things like that. And even in his dealing with people, he was loved by the staff also that was there.
You have a almost heartrending account of the morning of Saturday, the 9th of February 2013, when Afzal Guru had to walk to the gallows knowing that in a couple of minutes he would be hanged to death. And you say he did so with great courage, and you add that the jail staff had tears in their eyes. Tell me about that.
Well, it was done very surreptitiously by the then government. There, we were not told that there's going to be a hanging. There hadn't been a hanging since '89, but things were being spruced up in the phansi kothi right next door. We could see that, though they cut off our view later. And the morning, there was doubt that he or one of the other death sentence persons, the Khalistani, may be hanged. But it was not at all clear. And the staff was saying, no, some international people are coming. But that morning, he was taken away. Only his cell was open. The entire jail was locked the whole day. Entire jail, the jail is 10 jails, were locked the whole day. And he was taken by the law officer to his cell in the former block. He was allowed to do his namaz twice, had tea, all that stuff. And finally, at 8 o'clock sharp, the hanging had to be done. On these things, they're very precise. Other things, they may be late, but on that, they were precise. He had to walk up to the gallows. Now, the distance from the ward to the gallows, we used to go on that walk every day, the three of us, and was about, say, 2 minutes, basically. Apparently, the staff was lined up. The staff of people told us this. They were lined up on the right side along the wall. And he walked past them and he told the law officer, please look after their condition. They are not looked after properly. And they were weeping. I mean, he was going to be hanged and he was talking about the staff condition of the people. He walked up, they tried to put that hood around him, he threw it off, and just with his head held high, he went up. Actually, you know, this confidence of being hung, I gathered that earlier from a conversation with him. He believed strongly in Jannat. And one day he told me, I remember years back, he said that I just waiting to go and meet all the prophets and Iqbal and Muhammad and everyone in here. So that confidence was there. So that gave him the confidence. We'll be much more nervous, I'm sure, because we are
atheists. The striking thing of your description is you say the jail staff lined up on the right-hand side. He told the jail officers look after them, and they were weeping.
Yeah.
You mean that? They were weeping. The jail staff were crying as this man went to face his hanging.
Yeah, they only informed us. Otherwise, all these details we didn't know. I mean, we were locked up for the whole jail was locked up, and so were we locked up for the whole day. Only the next morning we opened out.
So Afzal Guru faced his death valiantly. He did not crumble or break down at that moment, as often is the case with people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Totally.
I get the feeling that you became very fond of Afzal Guru. Am I right?
Well, in a way, yes, but you must remember that there was no one else inside the entire jail who one could really converse with and be in touch with. There was no people, no doubt people like Sunil Rathi and some of the big dons, Brijesh Singh and all, they were very cooperative with me, and they had a lot of respect also for Naxalites, basically. And since I was portrayed as a leading Naxalite and all that, these people were, the dons particularly, surprising North Indian don, we had a sort of Robin Hood type of image, I think. And they were very...
but you had a...
But you couldn't talk with them.
But you had an intellectual rapport with Afzal Guru.
Yeah. Yes. And the only other person I had was with Sudendra Kulkarni, who came for 40 days, but he was outside the ward.
He didn't share a jail with you. He didn't share a ward with you.
No. We were in high-risk ward. He was in with the 2G people and all those. Yes.
Now, there are two other people that the audience will know about who were also for a while in jail with you. I want to touch on them very briefly. The first is the politician Om Prakash Chautala. You say he would frequently misuse jail facilities, and when he got caught, the punishment actually affected everyone. Tell me about that.
Actually, VIPs misuse facilities as a routine. And I don't know whether he suffered afterwards. He would use his legal mulakat to phone up his political contacts and all that. That's what we were told. We would see him in a wheelchair when we were in jail too, sitting around, and he would say hello and all that stuff. That's all. But no real close connections like I had with other big dons. Like, he's not a don, he's a politician, but well, whatever. And what I was trying to bring out, this is a norm that someone misuses a facility and the entire jail is punished. Now, we don't know whether he was stopped from phoning, but most of these VIPs have their phones and they pay the necessary amount. But we were stopped.
Just to be clear, Om Prakash Chautala would misuse the facility of meeting his lawyer, which was permitted initially fairly frequently.
Yeah.
He would misuse it to carry on political work. And you write that when he got caught out, the facility of meeting lawyers was restricted to just once a week for everyone, not just for Chautala, but for everyone.
And not just once a week, even one lawyer at a time could come. Earlier, 2, 3 could come. I had cases all over the country. I needed 2, 3 lawyers very often. And it was really very restrictive. And so, because of this incident.
So Om Prakash Chautala was the person who misused jail facilities, but everyone else suffered as a consequence.
Yeah, and that's a routine. For example, people would charge their mobiles using cells, the transistor cells. So they confiscated by transistor, saying cells are being used for this wrong purpose. So that was going on.
The second person that I want to briefly touch on, who also was in jail at the same time as you, was in fact the gangster Chota Rajan. You say he had VIP facilities. Tell me, why did he have VIP facilities and what did VIP facilities amount to?
No, that the government needs to be asked, but I have seen big dons, far bigger than him. That Brijesh Singh, who stayed with me for 1.5 years, is the topmost don in India, they say. And people in Banaras say you just mention his name and people start trembling. But he didn't have that facility. He's known as a Sarkari don. And a whole high-risk ward in jail too was emptied out for him. Not only that, he had all this TSP guards, that's the Tamilian guards that were there. A separate force was kept round the clock to guard him, to protect him. His food would be tested. His doctor would come there and test, also retest the food. His food would be cooked there only, good food. I mean, no one else has had that type of facility, and he would never be produced in court. He would just produce by video conferencing. And when he went for video conferencing in jail too, the entire jail would be shut. And ironically, one Kashmiri told me, when he was put in that jail, all Muslims were shifted out of that jail. He was basically terrified, and the government probably also, that Dawood will get him some way, or Dawood has a network.
So these special facilities for Chota Rajan, which you say amount to VIP treatment, were in a sense intended to protect him. But they went to a great extreme. He was the only prisoner in the whole of jail too.
Yeah. And he was in the high-risk ward in jail 2. The others, jail 2 has all the convicts and all the factories are there. And he would never come out of the ward, but he had to go once a month or say for video conferencing. At that time, no one would be allowed for that half an hour, 1 hour or something. And he was virtually being protected because of the fear of Dawood Ibrahim. Dawood could bribe even staff, anyone.
Absolutely. Now, your book, and I'm holding it up once again for the audience to see. Here it is. It's called Fractured Freedom, a Prison Memoir. But the truth is, it's more than just a prison memoir. Towards the end in particular, it's a very honest reflection on your ideological beliefs that you've held very closely since the time you were a teenager. It's an honest reflection on communism. And I want now to turn to that. Speaking of the aim of building a democratic and just society, you write, one may not have advanced even a step further. In fact, you add, there's probably been regression. Why did this regression happen? Why did the ambition of creating a just democratic society never get achieved?
Actually, this purpose of writing, the idea of writing a book in reflection was that when I came to communism in the late 60s, 70s, nearly half the world was communist. And there were movements, socialist movements, communist movements all over, wherever even where the governments were not. And now, just in my lifetime, there's nothing. China is supposed to be a communist, but just the latest Hurun report says that they have 1/3 of the world's billionaires, nearly double America's. So it's not communist. They have given economic benefits to everyone, but it's not communism. But there are some failings. Social, I say very clearly that the capitalist system, whether it's Keynesian capitalism or neoliberal capitalism, doesn't have any alternative for the masses of people. Socialism does, it has given people something, but still it has failed. Why? And that's why I try to reflect in this last section the reasons and how to bring in certain reforms in our work, activity, social being.
Can I
Yeah.
stop you there? Because at one point you asked the following question, and I think it's germane to what you're saying at the moment. The question you ask is, why did the masses so easily choose a free market over real freedom, and also over freedom from want? What's your answer to your own question?
Actually, I think on reflection, that's probably wrongly framed because they didn't really choose. It came upon them. It was pushed on them, and they were not aware of a choice because the communist alternative, the socialist, say in a country like India, was not there. They saw CPM government in Bengal, Kerala. They didn't see much difference between the Congress rule or other rule. So basically, that type of choice which I mentioned, they did not have.
But that's a common thing you're saying. If there was no real difference apparent to the people between a communist government in Bengal or a communist government in Kerala and other Congress governments that were clearly not communist governments, then communism, as practiced in India, failed. It didn't establish that it was different, leave aside establishing it was better.
Yeah, but that is why a different trend grew in India post 67, where the parliamentary communists, the so-called Naxalites, there are about 30 groups now, not all of them are banned. That came as an alternative. The idealistic youth had long since left these parliamentary people because people were quite fed up. They saw how these communists were working.
Mr.
So
Gandhi,
they went, yeah.
even Naxalite groups remain fringe on the political horizon. In some places, they are considered insurgents and battled, but even where they're not banned, they have a minimal impact on the way India governs itself. Naxalism clearly hasn't succeeded in changing the country. Why do you think Naxalism failed?
Yeah, that is what I'm trying to address in this last chapter of the importance of having a certain amount of values, freedom, and things that a project has to be done in a different way. And my 50 years of experience in the left movement, I've seen the parliamentary, I've seen the non-parliamentary, I've seen everything. We've been activists at the ground level. We've seen people, the Dalit movement, the tribals, all that. From that, I've tried to extract and also.
But what's the answer? Where did communism, where did Naxalism go wrong? You actually asked that question. Let me repeat the question in your book. So, where did we, or for that matter, the communists throughout the world, go wrong? Tell me, what's your answer? Where did you go wrong?
I really believe that there are three aspects to this. First is that it focused only on the equality question, that is economic. But my impression is that it should be a philosophical issue first. That is, happiness should be the target. If happiness is the target, and the question of living standards is part of that, then I think many of the errors that came within the communist movements worldwide, and probably in India also, could be rectified. The second aspect is there should be more freedom. Now, when I talk about freedom, I don't talk about freedom, just the democracy and freedom of the government. Freedom starts from oneself. We are tied up in knots of alienation. And if we are not free ourselves personally, we cannot be free in our social interaction. That should be there. And the third point is the values, which I call the Anuradha values, because she had superb values, values of honesty, straightforwardness. Those values need to be inculcated in any. So these three things, if they form a mosaic and is knitted into the project for change, then maybe it will be more sustaining, it will be more effective and long lasting.
I'll come to the three precepts or three things that you believe are necessary in a moment's time. But let me put to you one reason why perhaps communism did fail, why Naxalism did fail. They both failed because they misunderstand human nature. Communism sees human beings in an idealistic light, from each according to his ability to each according to his needs. The truth is, human beings put themselves and their family first, not society, not other people. Self interest, personal gain is what motivates human beings, not the desire to share, not the desire to do good or charity. It's this fundamental misunderstanding of human nature that perhaps lies at the bottom of that question: where did communism go wrong?
I would agree with you, though there are exceptions. I mean, we have seen in the 70s, 80s, a lot of idealistic youth who were very selfless and came out. But as a rule, what you say is 100% correct. Now, the whole point is that what one calls human nature is the social conditioning that society creates. The socio-economic system in which we are born creates a certain nature, what you call human nature. And it is this social conditioning that is very deep rooted right from childhood. I mean, after Marx came Freud. When Marx was there was no Freud. And Freud has shown that in the first 6 years or 8 years of our life, all our emotions get embedded deeply in our subconscious. And it is this that reflects. You may change your ideology, but your thinking doesn't change. And it gets reflected. What you say, human nature comes to the forefront. So that has to be worked on.
And this, in a sense, underlies the, I suppose, conclusion, if I can use that word, that you come to in your thinking. It's a very interesting progression in your thinking that took place in jail. You write, and I'm quoting from your book, the goalposts have to be changed from fighting inequality to happiness for all. And you spoke about the need to make happiness the target. As you said, living standards should be subsumed under it. I get the feeling that 10 years in jail have made you less political, more philosophical or spiritual.
Well, you see, Karan, the thing is that Marx and Engels, who first introduced this ideology, started with philosophy. They went to economics, Das Kapital, understanding the capitalist system. And the later revolutions took place was political. Lenin and Mao probably, and all these ones that were political. But the roots lie in its philosophy, and which tends to be forgotten. And I'm trying to bring that forward in these essays, that I'm trying to deal with it philosophically. And I feel, and maybe psychologically. Later, I will go more into psychology.
Tell me this, you're going back to the starting point that Marx and Engels had, the philosophy from which their thinking emerged. And in a sense, that philosophy had a hugely Hegelian influence, but we won't go down that route. I want to ask you something else instead. In 2008, your wife Anuradha, who you loved deeply, sadly died. Jail happened after that. 10 years later, you emerged from jail, less political, more philosophical, almost spiritual. What would Anuradha have made of the man who walked out of jail in 2019?
I think seeing her nature, as you see in the book, I've given her as a model of one of those three aspects: happiness, freedom, and a value system. I said, you just look at her and you'll understand what value system I'm talking about. Natural, simple, honest, childlike. Those are what a person, forget an activist, even normal human being should be like that. And she was like that. And I think she would very much have appreciated that, because unless this philosophical change is woven into the political project, I don't believe it will gain a new life in the future. That is why
Very
it's not that
important
I'm
and
saying.
very interesting.
Yeah.
Unless a philosophical understanding is woven into the
Yeah.
political project cannot succeed. You've definitely gone back to the very
Yeah.
philosophical roots with which Marx began. You
True.
finally comment on your own life in your book, and I want to quote that. You say, all said and done, it was probably the most fulfilling life possible, in spite of getting little result and experiencing many negative things as well. And I want to ask you this: is that happiness and satisfaction that I hear in those words, or acceptance and resignation of the way things were? Which of the two?
Well, I wouldn't demarcate it in that way, because in those days, I didn't have this philosophical thinking. But now, on reflection, I would say that I'm still committed to the project for change, but I want to see it more successful. And to see it more successful, I'm hoping that future generations will learn from this 50 years of experience, learn our negative, take the positive, learn the negative, and build a new in a better way. And
Okay.
so I believe it's a experience over a long period. So with the and justice and freedom, the path to justice and freedom have a lot of thorns, but they also have roses.
We've come to the end of this interview, Mr. Gandhi, but because
Yes.
yesterday you announced on the Dune School WhatsApp group that you were doing an
Yes.
interview with me today, I've been flooded with requests from fellow DOSCOs who said to me, you cannot
You are
end
one
the
also.
interview by asking Kobad Gandhi about Dune School. So let me at this point ask you two questions about the school that you went to, the school I was at, the school
Yes.
that the Dune School WhatsApp group centers around. When you look back, were you happy in Dune School?
Well, yes. When I look back, I find that if you see the present education system elsewhere, it's all cramming and mugging and things like that. We were really given a lot of freedom to think. We were made to think, and not only academically. We were all sports. We were. I was mediocre in both, but I did a lot of academic stuff, and I played all the sports from boxing to tennis. So I didn't do well in any except chess and table tennis, but it really gave an all-round experience and a
Still,
broad outlook, probably, though elitist it was. Yes.
well, that's the thought I wanted to pick up on. Though elitist and though expensive,
Yeah,
do
expensive.
schools like Doon School have a place in India today?
Well, if I think it's this type of education system that really needs to be, I don't know if it still exists. I don't know what exists in Dune today, but this thing where you have an equal emphasis on sports and study, and you are encouraged to think. There are certain models, I believe, in the West. I forget what they call that German fellow and things like that. Even Krishnamurti, J. Krishnamurti has
Goldenstone.
tried.
Goldenstone.
Ah, that's it. Yes.
Goldenstone.
Yes, that. So these type of things really need to be inculcated. Indian education is terrible,
So
and Doon School had that then.
what you're saying is that if the
Yeah,
old Doon School that you were once a part of is still
yeah,
the Doon School of today, where
yeah,
children are encouraged to think, to decide for themselves, and are
yeah.
given an opportunity to allow their talents to flourish right across the horizon, that sort of school does have a place in India today. That's what you're saying.
Very much. Yes, very much. So, and it's need of the hour, in fact, and it shouldn't be so expensive. It should be a normal school
My
also.
last question, Mr. Gandhi. You
Yes.
mentioned in your book that your classmates at Doon School included Sanjay Gandhi, Kamal Nath, Naveen Patnaik.
Oh
What were
wow.
they like when they were kids?
Well, the two of them were really uh, had a terrible reputation. In fact, That's the good thing about the Doon school. Sanjay Gandhi was asked to leave the school, though he was the grandson of Nehru. They had Kamal Nath and Sanjay Gandhi were very close associates. They were not interested in studies or sports, and they were just in what you call mischievous activities during school. And they had that type of reputation. Naveen Patnaik was more quiet type, I suppose, like Ishat and myself, that type of person. But these two had a notorious reputation.
Did you like them when you were in school together? Did you like these three, Sanjay Gandhi, Kamal Nath, and
well, you see, only we came to know one, Kamal Nath. He was in my house and in fact, very often my roommate. The other two were distant. So I was not very closely. Normally by the house, you have association. And I was not particularly close to Kamal Nath.
All right. That says it all. Mr. Gandhi, thank you very much for this interview.
Thank you.
Thank you in particular for sharing your anecdotes about Tihar jail and all the other jails, for describing in detail the drama of your arrest or abduction as it actually was. But also thank you for being so honest about your reflections on communism. The fact that you happily and readily admit it hasn't succeeded, it needs to reorient itself. Happiness should be the target. Economic living standards should be a part of it, but the goal is happiness for all. I wish you every happiness in the years ahead.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.